The marble floors of First National Bank echoed with the sharp click of designer heels and the rustle of expensive suits. The scent of fresh coffee from the executive lounge mixed with the sterile smell of money counters working overtime. Behind the polished granite counter, Linda Martinez moved quietly, her practiced fingers dancing across the keyboard like she'd done 1,000 times before. No one knows she once managed portfolios worth more than this entire branch's annual revenue. No one even notices how her eyes track every financial document that crosses her station, catching errors that senior analysts miss. But when the regional directors struggle with a complex international wire transfer that's been stalled for hours, she observes from her teller window. What they didn't know was that she'd restructured similar transactions for Fortune 500 companies. And with just one quiet suggestion, she was about to expose a system that had kept brilliant minds invisible for far too long. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone thinks doesn't belong there. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the banking floor where Linda had worked for 3 years. 3 years of yes, sir, and I'll get my manager, while watching lesser minds fumble through problems she could solve in minutes. Today felt different. The tension in the air was thick as honey, and the cluster of suits near the executive offices kept growing larger. "The Jakarta transfer is still frozen," she heard Regional Director Thompson mutter to his assistant. "Legal says we could be looking at massive penalties if this doesn't clear by noon." Linda's hand paused over her keyboard. Jakarta. She knew that routing system inside and out. Those weren't just numbers on a screen. They represented families, businesses, dreams hanging in the balance. But in this marble palace, she was just the teller who processed deposits and smiled on command. A well-dressed black man approached her window, his tailored suit impeccable, his presence commanding yet humble. Marcus Williams moved with the quiet confidence of someone used to boardrooms, not the nervous energy of typical banking customers. In his hand, he carried a simple leather portfolio that looked like it had seen many important meetings. "Good morning," he said, his voice warm despite the sterile environment. "I need to wire $2.3 million to our Singapore office for a merger completion." Linda looked up into eyes that held intelligence and patience. In 3 years, she'd processed thousands of transactions, but something about this one felt significant. Not because of the amount, the bank handled larger transfers daily, but because of the quiet dignity in how he presented the request, as if he knew exactly what he was doing, despite being in a place that would soon prove it didn't know him at all. If this story moves you, hit that subscribe button. We share incredible stories of overlooked heroes every week. Rate this story from 0 to 10 in the comments and tell us about a time you witnessed hidden talent being dismissed. Your stories matter, and they inspire our next videos. This isn't just about banking. It's about the brilliant minds we walk past every single day without seeing. Linda Martinez had worked at First National for 3 years, processing deposits, handling withdrawals, and watching financial disasters unfold from her teller window while executives walked by her as if she were part of the furniture. But Linda watched. She always watched. The way numbers flowed, the patterns in international transfers, the subtle signs that separated legitimate business from potential fraud. On that Tuesday morning, Linda heard something that made her shoulders tense. "The compliance algorithms are rejecting every pathway we've tried," said Regional Director Thompson, his voice carrying across the marble lobby. "Legal says if this Jakarta wire doesn't clear in 2 hours, we're looking at regulatory violations that could cost us our international banking license." Linda moved closer to her station's edge, pretending to organize deposit slips. Those words weren't foreign to her. She whispered under her breath, "Correspondent banking relationships. They're probably hitting the OFAC screening protocol." Senior Vice President Rebecca Hayes caught the movement, turning with a smirk. Excuse me, Linda, but I think customer service might need some help with account openings. These technical matters are a bit above your pay grade. But deep inside, something had stirred. Not just the familiar sting of dismissal, but something fiercer. Recognition. Linda had been watching Marcus Williams since he entered the bank 20 minutes ago. She'd seen how his eyes scanned the room, not with the nervousness of someone unfamiliar with wealth, but with the assessment of someone who understood systems, hierarchies, and the subtle power dynamics playing out in institutions like this. When he approached her window with his wire transfer request, she immediately noticed the details. Singapore routing number was correct. The corporate account structure indicated a sophisticated business entity, and the timing suggested this wasn't routine, but urgent. "I'll need to verify some details with our international department," Linda said professionally, though she already knew the transfer would hit the same compliance walls that had trapped the Jakarta wire for hours. As she walked toward the international department, she overheard more of the executive conversation. "The client is threatening to move their entire portfolio. We're talking about $500 million in assets," Thompson was saying. "Plus, they're connected to 3 other major accounts. If we lose this relationship—" Linda returned to Marcus, who waited patiently despite the obvious delays around him. "There seems to be a processing delay with our international systems," she explained. "Our senior staff is working on similar issues this morning." Marcus nodded, understanding immediately. Compliance screening catching everything? The question stopped Linda cold. Most customers would ask about timeframes or fees. This man was asking about the actual technical barrier. She looked into his eyes again and saw something that made her pulse quicken. He understood these systems as well as she did. "Yes," she said quietly. "The automated protocols are rejecting complex international transfers. They'll probably try manual override processes, but that could take hours. And by then," Marcus said with a slight smile, "business hours in Singapore close, and the merger documents expire." Linda stared at him. He wasn't just another wealthy client. He understood the global implications, the time zones, the regulatory frameworks. But here he was, being processed like any other customer, while the executives 20 feet away stumbled through problems he clearly understood. That's when she made her decision. Not the cautious, invisible decision she'd been making for 3 years, but the kind of decision that changes everything. "Mr. Williams," she said, lowering her voice, "may I suggest something that might help both your transaction and resolve the broader issue the bank is facing?" For the first time that morning, Marcus looked genuinely surprised. Then intrigued. "I'm listening," he said. In that moment, Linda felt the weight of 3 years of silence. 3 years of watching incompetence masquerade as authority. 3 years of brilliant solutions dying in her throat. But not today. 20 minutes later, the executives still lingered near the international department, voices growing sharper with each failed attempt. "Try the London Correspondent Bank," Thompson snapped at a junior analyst. "Route it through swift network alternative pathways." Linda watched from her station as they implemented exactly the wrong solution. The kind of approach that would create more compliance flags, not fewer. Without thinking, she spoke up from her teller window. "The issue isn't routing pathways. It's the beneficiary verification protocols timing out, because the Singapore bank's response system is 3 hours behind OFAC update cycles." Dead silence. 15 pairs of eyes turned toward her like she'd just spoken in a foreign language. "Excuse me?" Senior Vice President Rebecca Hayes scoffed, her voice dripping with condescension. "I think deposit processing is more your speed. Linda, we'll handle the complex international banking." But Marcus Williams was looking at Linda with an expression that made her realize she'd just crossed a line she couldn't uncross. This wasn't embarrassment she felt walking back to her station. This was something else entirely. This was anger finally waking up. Linda had spent 3 years perfecting the art of invisibility. arriving early, processing transactions flawlessly, never speaking unless spoken to. She'd watched junior analysts make million-dollar mistakes while she balanced every penny perfectly. She'd listened to executives discuss strategies she'd implemented successfully years ago, back when her opinions mattered, back when her voice carried weight in boardrooms instead of being dismissed from behind bulletproof glass. The bank's marble grandeur felt different now. The polished surfaces that once impressed her now seemed to reflect a system built on appearances rather than competence. Every click of expensive heels sounded like a countdown to some inevitable reckoning. At 11:15 a.m., she watched Thompson try the London routing. Exactly as she'd predicted. More red flags appeared on the compliance screen. The Jakarta transfer was now joined by two other frozen wires, creating a cascade failure that would ripple through the bank's international relationships. Marcus remained at her window, patient but clearly calculating. He'd been making quiet phone calls, and Linda could hear fragments. Yes, the full portfolio. Regulatory concerns, alternative arrangements. How long have you worked in international banking? He asked her quietly during a lull. The question was simple, but Linda heard layers underneath. He was asking how she knew what she knew, why she understood systems that supposedly required years of specialized training. I don't, she said carefully. I work here, at this window. Marcus smiled, not condescending like the executives, but knowing. That's not what I asked. Linda looked around the banking floor. Thompson was now on his phone with what sounded like legal counsel. Hayes was practically barking at the IT department. Junior analysts scurried between departments with printouts and worried expressions. The Jakarta client's deadline was 43 minutes away, and they were further from a solution than when they'd started. 15 years, Linda said finally. International corporate banking, portfolio management, regulatory compliance. I specialized in Asia-Pacific markets and cross-border transaction protocols. And now? Now I process deposits and pretend I don't see train wrecks coming. Marcus nodded slowly, studying her face. What changed? Linda felt something crack open in her chest. Not breaking, but opening like a door that had been locked too long. She looked at this man who'd asked the right questions, who'd seen what others missed, who'd recognized expertise hiding in plain sight. My husband got sick, she said simply. Cancer. The kind that requires you to choose between career advancement and being present for every treatment, every difficult day, every moment that might be your last together. I chose love. The banking world doesn't hold positions for people who choose love. In that quiet moment between customer and teller, Marcus Williams made a decision that would change everything. But first, he needed to know one more thing. Linda, he said, if you could fix this mess, the Jakarta wire, the compliance issues, the cascade failure that's about to cost this bank its international banking relationships, how would you do it? In her small apartment that evening, Linda sat with her laptop open to a folder marked Professional Certifications. On the screen were documents that told a story this bank would never have imagined. Masters in International Finance from Wharton, Certified Anti-Money Laundering Specialist, Advanced Certifications in Cross-Border Banking Regulations. The pages were full of achievements that once defined her identity. Back then, at Morrison International Bank, this was her language. She'd managed portfolios exceeding $2 billion, structured deals across 17 countries, and developed compliance protocols that became industry standards. Her expertise in Asia-Pacific markets was legendary. She could navigate the complex relationships between American banking regulations and Asian financial systems like reading a map of her own neighborhood. The last time she touched these documents, she'd been packing her office at Morrison, Senior Vice President of International Markets, corner office on the 42nd floor, a team of 12 analysts who respected her judgment implicitly. That morning, She'd been negotiating a $800 million infrastructure deal with Japanese investors. That afternoon, she got the call about David's diagnosis. Stage 3 pancreatic cancer. Aggressive treatment required immediately. The oncologist was clear. The next 6 months will determine everything. He'll need constant support, especially during chemotherapy cycles. Many patients don't survive without dedicated advocacy and care. Linda had looked around her corner office. The awards, the deal tombstones, the international clocks showing market times in Tokyo, London, Singapore. All of it meant nothing if she lost the man who'd supported every step of her climb to the top. The hardest conversation wasn't with David about leaving Morrison. He'd insisted she could maintain both, find a way to balance career and care. The hardest conversation was with herself, choosing between the identity she'd built over 15 years and the love that made that identity meaningful. She'd tried to negotiate reduced responsibilities, remote work arrangements, flexible schedules. But international banking doesn't pause for personal crises. Markets open regardless of family emergencies. Clients don't wait for convenient timing. Her boss, Robert Chen, had been sympathetic but clear. "Linda, you're brilliant, but this role requires total commitment. We can't hold a senior position while you're managing personal issues." So she'd resigned, sold the downtown condo, moved to a modest apartment near the cancer treatment center, and watched David fight for his life, while her professional reputation slowly faded from industry memory. David survived. 2 years of treatment, countless nights in hospital rooms, experimental procedures that drained their savings and her connections to the financial world. But he survived, and their love deepened into something unbreakable. When David was finally in remission, Linda tried to return to international banking. But 15-month gaps on resumes tell stories that hiring managers don't want to hear. Career break raises questions about commitment. Family medical issues suggests divided loyalties. The woman who once restructured billion-dollar deals couldn't get interviews for positions 3 levels below her former role. First National hired her as a teller because her financial background made her reliable with numbers, but they never looked deeper. To them, she was someone who'd stepped down from banking, not someone who'd stepped away from the peak of it. But expertise doesn't disappear. Every morning at her teller window, Linda saw patterns others missed. She watched junior analysts make mistakes she could prevent, observed executives stumble through problems she'd solved repeatedly, listened to compliance discussions where she knew exactly which regulations applied and how to navigate them. She didn't leave international banking. International banking never left her. She just had to walk away for love. Now, sitting with her laptop, Linda felt the familiar rush of solving complex problems. The Jakarta wire, Marcus Williams's Singapore transfer, the Cascade compliance failures. She could see the solutions clearly. Not because she was lucky or intuitive, but because she'd spent 15 years mastering these exact systems. Tomorrow, she would return to First National Bank. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, Linda Martinez remembered who she really was. Not the invisible teller behind bulletproof glass, but the expert who'd shaped international banking protocols that these executives probably still used. Without knowing her name was in the original documentation. "There it is," she whispered to her reflection in the laptop screen. It was always there. The bank was still buzzing with crisis energy when Linda arrived 30 minutes early the next morning. She entered through the employee entrance, her modest sedan a stark contrast to the luxury vehicles in the executive parking spaces. The marble lobby was empty except for security guards and cleaning staff, but she could see lights already, burning in the international department. Linda walked directly to the customer service computer terminal and quietly logged in using her supervisor. Override codes, credentials she'd earned through 3 years of flawless performance that no one had thought to restrict. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with surgical precision, accessing the compliance monitoring system that had paralyzed the bank's international operations. She pulled up the Jakarta transfer first. Just as she'd diagnosed yesterday, the issue wasn't routing or documentation. It was a timing synchronization problem between OFAC's updated sanctions list and Singapore's correspondent bank verification protocols. The automated system was comparing yesterday's cleared entities against today's restricted list, creating false positive flags. Linda navigated to the back-end compliance parameters, screens most executives never saw because they relied on junior analysts to handle technical details. She adjusted the verification window timing by 4 hours to account for the Asia-Pacific update cycles, then implemented a cascading verification protocol that would check multiple international databases sequentially rather than simultaneously. The Jakarta transfer cleared immediately. Next, she accessed Marcus Williams's Singapore wire. The system had flagged it not because of compliance issues, but because the transaction amount triggered enhanced due diligence protocols that required manual verification of beneficial ownership, verification that could take days through normal channels. But Linda recognized the true corporate structure immediately. Williams Investment Group wasn't just any company. She'd actually worked on similar deals during her Morrison days. She knew how to navigate the beneficial ownership documentation, which subsidiary entities to verify, and how to structure the compliance reporting to satisfy regulatory requirements without delays. Within minutes, Marcus's transfer was processing smoothly. When she finished, Linda looked at the screen showing 17 international transfers that had been frozen for over 12 hours, now flowing freely through the system. There was nothing else to say. She quietly logged out and returned to her teller station. At 8:47 a.m., senior analyst Janet Kim discovered the overnight activity. "Mr. Thompson?" She called across the department. "The Jakarta wire cleared. All the frozen transfers are processing." "What?" Thompson rushed to her workstation, staring at the screen in disbelief. "How is this possible? We tried everything yesterday." Within minutes, Regional Director Thompson, SVP Rebecca Hayes, and 3 other executives stood clustered around Janet's monitor, studying transaction logs that showed sophisticated technical solutions implemented with expert precision. "This could be a security breach," Hayes whispered nervously. "Someone accessed our compliance systems after hours. We need to pull the audit logs immediately." The IT department arrived within minutes, running traces on system access. Soon, 12 people stood staring at the evidence of what had happened overnight. "The solutions are brilliant," admitted Senior Compliance Officer David Park. "Whoever did this understands our systems better than our own technical team. They didn't just fix the immediate problems. They implemented protocol improvements that will prevent similar issues for months." Within an hour, the story had spread through the bank's internal communications. The mysterious overnight solution had saved not just millions in potential penalties, but preserved critical international banking relationships that had taken years to develop. By 10 a.m., the regional director received calls from 3 major corporate clients expressing gratitude for the rapid resolution of their transfer delays. The Jakarta client, instead of pulling their $500 million portfolio, was praising First National's technical capabilities. "We need to identify who has this level of expertise on our staff," Thompson announced in an emergency management meeting. "This person should be heading our international department, not working overnight solving problems anonymously." The social media response was swift and overwhelming. Corporate clients began sharing their positive experiences. Industry publications picked up the story of First National's innovative overnight solutions and banking. Forums buzzed with speculation about which technical genius had saved the day, but in her teller station, Linda Martinez processed morning deposits with the same quiet efficiency she'd maintained for 3 years. watching executives take credit for solutions she'd implemented while they slept. The difference was that today, Marcus Williams was watching too, and he was about to change everything. They pulled the security footage and IT access logs, and there she was. Linda Martinez, employee ID 4847, the teller from Window 3, implementing solutions that had eluded their entire executive team. "That's the woman who made the comment about OFAC protocols yesterday," whispered Senior Vice President Rebecca Hayes, staring at the timestamp showing Linda's 6:30 a.m. arrival and systematic resolution of every frozen transfer. The conference room fell silent as the implications settled. The person they'd dismissed, condescended to, and ignored had quietly saved their international banking license, millions in penalties, and relationships worth hundreds of millions in portfolio assets. Regional Director Thompson felt his face flush with a combination of embarrassment and growing concern. "Bring her up here immediately. We need to understand how a teller has access to systems that require senior-level authorization." Linda sat across from the executive team in the mahogany-paneled conference room she'd never been invited to enter. Her employee handbook rested on the polished table between them, a stark reminder of the hierarchy they'd all taken for granted. "You want to know who I am," she said calmly, meeting each executive's eyes in turn. "So I'll tell you." Linda opened her laptop and displayed her professional credentials, documents that painted a picture none of them had bothered to discover in 3 years of working. Beside her daily, "I spent 15 years in international banking before I came here, Senior Vice President at Morrison International, managing portfolios exceeding $2 billion. I developed cross-border compliance protocols that are still industry standards. Those OFAC verification systems you've been struggling with, I helped design the original frameworks when they were implemented after the 2008 financial crisis." Thompson's mouth opened slightly. Hayes had gone pale. "The Singapore routing protocols that blocked Mr. Williams's transfer? I negotiated the correspondent banking agreements that created those verification requirements when I was structuring deals across 17 Asia-Pacific markets. The Jakarta wire that nearly cost you your international banking license? I've resolved hundreds of similar transfers using the same timing synchronization solutions I implemented yesterday morning." Linda's voice remained steady, professional, but each word landed like a precision strike. "I didn't leave international banking because I couldn't handle the work. I left because my husband was diagnosed with stage 3 pancreatic cancer, and I chose to save his life instead of climbing corporate ladders. I didn't lose my expertise when I became a caregiver. I didn't forget 15 years of experience when I chose love over career advancement." The silence in the room was deafening. Linda could see each executive recalculating every interaction they'd had with her, every dismissive comment, every assumption about her capabilities based on her current position rather than her qualifications. "When I applied for senior positions after my husband's recovery, hiring managers saw a gap in my resume and assumed I'd stepped down from banking rather than stepped away from the peak of it. So I took the only position offered, teller at First National, because I needed income and thought maybe, eventually, someone would recognize what I could contribute." Rebecca Hayes, who had made the comment about Linda's pay grade just 24 hours earlier, looked like she wanted to disappear into the leather conference chair. "For 3 years, I've watched this institution make costly mistakes I could have prevented with a simple conversation. I've seen junior analysts struggle with problems I solved routinely at Morrison. I've listened to compliance discussions where you've consulted expensive external advisors for solutions I could have provided in minutes." Linda paused, letting that reality settle across the room. "Yesterday, when Mr. Williams needed help with his Singapore transfer, and when your Jakarta crisis threatened this bank's international relationships, I didn't act anonymously to show off or prove a point. I acted because this is what I do. This is who I am. Financial systems, regulatory compliance, International banking protocols? This is my expertise, regardless of which window I'm assigned to work behind. She closed the laptop and looked directly at Regional Director Thompson. I didn't leave international banking. International banking never left me. I just had to walk away for love. In that quiet conference room, they finally saw Linda Martinez, not as the invisible teller who processed their deposits, but as the expert who had been solving their problems from behind bulletproof glass, while they struggled with solutions that were always within arm's reach. The next morning, Linda stepped into First National Bank like always, but something was fundamentally different. Word had spread overnight through the bank's internal communications about the teller who had single-handedly prevented an international banking crisis. The marble lobby, usually filled with the ambient noise of routine transactions, was unusually quiet. As she walked toward her station, the morning shift began to notice her presence. Then Janet Kim from International Services started clapping. Slowly, deliberately, with genuine respect. The sound echoed off the marble walls, and one by one, other employees joined. Tellers, analysts, even security guards who had witnessed yesterday's executive panic. "Thank you," said Marcus Williams, who had been waiting near her window since the bank opened. "Not just for processing my transfer, but for showing everyone in this building what excellence actually looks like." Linda later learned that Marcus hadn't just been a patient customer yesterday. During her overnight problem-solving session, he had made some calls of his own. As it turned out, Marcus Williams wasn't simply a businessman needing a wire transfer. He was the CEO and primary shareholder of Williams Investment Group, a private equity firm managing $4.2 billion in assets across 3 continents. More importantly, he was a man who recognized systemic problems when he saw them. By noon, Regional Director Thompson had called an all-staff meeting in the main banking hall. Linda stood near her teller station, uncertain about the purpose, until Thompson began speaking with a humility she'd never heard from him before. "Yesterday, this institution nearly lost its international banking relationships due to our failure to properly utilize the expertise within our own walls," he announced to the assembled staff. "We have operated under assumptions about talent, qualifications, and capability that prevented us from recognizing the extraordinary skills of our colleagues." He turned toward Linda. "Effective? Immediately. We're restructuring our international banking department. Linda Martinez will be promoted to Senior Vice President of International Compliance and Operations, with full authority over cross-border banking protocols and regulatory affairs." The applause was genuine, sustained, and long overdue. But Linda had conditions. "I accept this position under one requirement," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the marble lobby. "We establish a comprehensive skills assessment program for every employee in this bank. No more assumptions about capability based on current positions or resume gaps. No more brilliant minds working beneath their qualifications because life circumstances required difficult choices." The room buzzed with excitement. Tellers, security guards, customer service representatives, and junior analysts began to realize that their own hidden talents and unrealized potential might finally be recognized and developed. Thompson nodded immediately. "Agreed. We'll implement employee skills audits across all departments within 60 days. That afternoon, Linda received a call that changed everything even further. Marcus Williams had an additional announcement. "Ms. Martinez," he said, his voice warm with respect. "Williams Investment Group has been looking for a partner bank that truly understands international markets and regulatory compliance. Based on yesterday's demonstration of technical excellence and institutional integrity, we'd like to discuss moving our primary banking relationship to First National." The number that followed made Linda's breath catch. $4.2 billion in managed assets, plus the banking relationships of 12 subsidiary companies and their international operations. "However," Marcus continued, "this partnership is contingent on First National's commitment to the cultural changes you've proposed. We invest with institutions that recognize and develop talent regardless of how it's packaged or where it's currently positioned, under one condition that would revolutionize how the bank identified and promoted talent. Linda had transformed not just her own career trajectory, but the opportunities available to every undervalued employee in the institution. The auditorium was packed 3 weeks later for Linda's first presentation to the bank's board of directors. She stepped up to the podium and looked out at faces that now showed respect instead of dismissal. Excellence isn't always found in corner offices or revealed through traditional career paths, she began. Sometimes the most qualified person in the room is the one everyone assumes doesn't belong there. Sometimes the solution to your most complex problems comes from the person you walk past every day without seeing. Today, this institution begins a new chapter, not just in international banking, but in recognizing that expertise comes in many forms, and that our greatest assets may already be working among us, waiting for someone to ask the right questions and listen to the answers. The entire auditorium rose in thunderous, sustained applause. Linda Martinez still arrives at First National Bank early each morning, but now she walks through the executive entrance to her corner office on the international banking floor. Her days begin with global market analysis and regulatory briefings instead of deposit processing. But she hasn't forgotten the view from behind the teller window. Every morning, she makes a point of walking through the main banking floor, stopping to chat with tellers, security guards, and customer service representatives. She knows their names, asks about their families, and most importantly, listens for hints of expertise that traditional hiring processes might have missed. The employee skills assessment program she championed has already identified 17 staff members whose qualifications far exceeded their current roles. Maria Gonzalez, the night security guard, turned out to have an MBA in cybersecurity. James Park, who worked part-time in customer service, had managed municipal bond portfolios before caring for his elderly parents required a career pause. Young analysts and new employees seek her guidance regularly. Excellence isn't always visible, she tells them, sharing the wisdom earned through years of being overlooked. Sometimes the most important lessons come from people who've made difficult choices, who've sacrificed advancement for values more meaningful than corner offices. Marcus Williams became more than a client. He became a partner in transforming how financial institutions recognize and develop talent. His investment group's partnership with First National grew to include not just banking services, but collaborative programs that identify and nurture underutilized expertise across the industry. The lawsuit mentioned in whispered conversations never materialized, because it never needed to. What happened instead was more powerful. Systemic change that prevented future injustices rather than simply penalizing past ones. Linda's story reminds us that brilliance often disguises itself as ordinary. That expertise can be found behind any counter or desk if we're humble enough to look and wise enough to listen. Sometimes the most qualified person in the room is the one everyone thinks doesn't belong there. Her transformation, from invisible teller to respected executive, wasn't just a personal victory. It was proof that institutions can change when they choose to see people as they truly are, rather than as their circumstances might suggest. What hidden talents are you overlooking in your own life? What assumptions are you making about the people around you? Share your thoughts below. Because every day, extraordinary people are waiting for someone to ask the right questions and truly hear their answers.